Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look for ways that we can come together and help each other as we minister in the body of Christ. Today we have with us Reverend Terry Motte. He's an ordained Free Will Baptist minister, a Board Certified Pastoral Counselor, and a certified Thanatologist with 12 years of clinical experience in healthcare. He's a member of the American Association of Death Education and Counseling, the American Association of Counselor Educators. He has over 31 years of experience as a pastor, but he's also worked for more than 12 years as a hospice counselor, and he lives out in Salem, Oregon. So, Brother Terry, thank you, my friend, for stopping by to be with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Moody. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, first off, we just thank you for the important work that you're doing. You're kind of a unique person. You've been pastoring for over 30 years in a Free Will Baptist Church out there, but you've also been working in the healthcare industry, working in hospice and doing grief counseling. So it's especially important for us to have you today because what we have with this COVID-19 crisis is quite a bit of complicated grief, don't we?
Yes, it definitely presents some unique challenges to all of us, and some of those challenges have to do with the social distancing that we're doing.
Yes.
The travel restrictions that we all find ourselves under now, and especially if a death of a loved one takes place. And that death perhaps maybe takes place in isolation, away from family and friends and close loved ones. And then and if that happens, then our funeral traditions are altered, and we'd find ourselves at a loss as to what to do. So this COVID-19 really does present some challenges to those who are suffering loss because of this virus.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about complicated grief in general, because COVID-19, as you just mentioned, not being able to do the funerals, graduations not happening, these kinds of things are complicated grief. Tell the listeners a bit about what complicated grief is, because it's something that from time to time different people will experience, and then we'll go through about what we might be able to do to cope with this COVID-19 situations and the challenges that are unique here.
Yes, well, complicated grief, people need to understand it's not your typical grieving experience. And I think people need to understand that the what we call the grieving experience is a process. It happens over a period of time. And everyone's time schedule is different, and everyone's grief is unique, just as our fingerprints are individual and unique. So, we don't want to say that someone's grieving experience is somehow not normal. So we need to accept whatever people are experiencing. But complicated grief is identifiable and diagnosable and treatable, which is a good thing. But some of the things that people experience in complicated grief, they are filled with longing and yearning for the person who died. They think about their loss so much that it's hard to do normal everyday things that people typically do, like caring for others or caring for children, or going to work, cooking, shopping, paying bills, exercising, these things that a person has no trouble doing. People with complicated grief have a struggle just to get those kinds of things done. They can't shake the belief that their loved one is gone. They can't accept what's happened. It seems so wrong and unfair. Their life feels empty, and they feel angry and bitter about the death. And they may be ambushed from time to time, overwhelmed with a deep despair and grief. People with complicated grief often avoid people and places and things that remind them of their loved one. and they cry a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They cry a lot. Whenever their mind wanders, a lot of people report to me that they often shed tears when they're alone in their car, driving
Mm-hmm.
from somewhere to another place. And what's one of the defining ways to know if someone is maybe experiencing complicated grief, you can have a conversation with someone who had experienced a loss that maybe was a few years ago, and you might just casually run into them, and you begin a conversation, and of course they bring up their loss, and you try to comfort them to the best of your ability, and you walk away from that conversation, and you think to yourself, if I didn't know better, I would have thought that they had just lost their loved one a week or so ago.
Yes.
And complicated grief really is someone who is stuck, if you will,
Mm.
in the grieving process and not moving forward uh, through that process.
That's good. So when we think about the Bible, Jacob is an example when he didn't know about Joseph and his situation. And even Joseph is an example there in Genesis 50 when the brothers bring up, hey, Dad said, forgive us. And he starts crying, remembering what they
Yes.
had done to him in Genesis 37. So those are some examples. And often with complicated grief, it's somebody who died in an accident or homicide or suicide. And but this situation too creates complicated grieving situations, doesn't it? Because it's not what we would expect, and not being able to have a wedding or not being able to have a graduation or missing your senior year. So talk with us a bit about this situation with COVID-19 and then what we can do to help cope in this complicated grieving situation that we have today.
Well, yeah, a lot of people are finding that normal life as we know it is difficult to have. We talk about the death of someone, but there's also graduations that are not going to take place. There are weddings that are on hold. And, our funerals, obviously, we have to worry about them and what we're going to do. These kinds of rituals, they provide structure and form and allow us to express our thoughts and our feelings about these important experiences of development and of our life in general. And yes, this COVID-19 deaths definitely put us in a different category. There's basically only 4 ways that people die. We use the acronym NASH, N-A-S-H. And so N is a natural death, the A is either accidental, the S is suicidal, and the H is homicidal. So although the COVID-19 deaths may be natural in the sense of a disease process that takes place, people are going to be experiencing, maybe some post-traumatic stress, or in this case, may develop over time some complicated grief, and that's because we have we're not prepared, if you will, and the anger that's associated with being separated from our loved ones. These kinds of things create the complicated grief. We call it unfinished business, unexpressed emotions, things that we left undone, unfinished business that we often talk about. So I've encouraged people, they need to realize that if they or one of their loved ones walks through or is taken through that emergency room door, possibility exists that that they may not see their loved ones again. And that's what's happening all across the country right now.
And we've talked about that in some of our promotional director meetings, that like the first 100 people that die in the U.S. of COVID-19 died alone. And it sounds like that's continuing to happen. I know you
Mm-hmm.
work on a hospice unit, and they gown you up and work with you. But it sounds like what you're saying is know that that's a possibility. Think about that.
Yes.
Many pastors are probably listening in, and you've got someone in your congregation. You got to have a close relationship, and really they're just now starting to allow chaplains to be with COVID-19 victims, if you will, aren't they? What kind of recommendations do you have for them as they're trying to minister to sick people that they may or may not have access to? And you just gave, I think, some good advice to family members. You think about that and kind of be
Sure.
prepared. What can you share with them?
Yes. Yes. Actually, I was talking with the chaplain department at our one of our local hospitals here in Salem, Oregon, and he was telling me that the hospitals recognize the problem of not allowing close family members to come into the hospital to be with their loved ones. So what they are actually doing now, they are issuing cell phones to the different departments. Every department now has a cell phone and a number, and they are trying to connect through FaceTime and Skype and Zoom and other ways, contact with their loved ones. I just heard on the news yesterday of a doctor who allowed his patient to have one last telephone conversation with his family before he was intubated. And because once you have that intubation, you're not able to speak, and being able to say what you need to say before that happens is very important. Pastors are not generally being allowed in to hospitals right now. However, they will take it on a case-by-case basis, and under extreme cases, they will allow you to come in. You will have to be screened, have your temperature taken, and go through the screening process. You'll have to gown up. You'll have to put your mask and your gloves on, and all of the requirements that the hospital have before you'll be allowed to come in. But it's not a total shutout, and that's true. Generally, hospitals make the exception when there's an end-of-life issue. Also, in nursing homes right now, they're not letting family and visitors in, but again, they will make exceptions for pastors if you ask and are willing to go through their screening process.
So we encourage folks to have good relationships with the nursing home or the hospital you're working with, because one thing they have to know, I can trust you. I can,
Yes.
if you're sick, you're going to tell me, and you're going to go by the rules that there are.
Absolutely.
And have to be on top of it. And often you've had good relationships with them in the past, and
Yes.
they often want people to be there with them to help comfort them at the end. And so we really need to be prepared for that.
One of the other things that I have found successful in the past, particularly with dementia patients who may be suffering some extra anxiety because they cannot connect with their loved ones, if you are able to make a recording of yourself and your voice, and if you can somehow get that to them, and the staff can play that recording, and you can say soothing things to them, and just the sound of your voice will be comforting. If you cannot be there physically, try the recording of your voice, or at least, it's the same thing when you call somebody up and you get to hear their voice. It's good to hear from you, and it's soothing.
Excellent. So let's remember that we've got so many folks that are separated. If anyone that goes to the hospital, in the coming days you're probably going to be separated from. Send messages like that, send recordings. Remember, the hospital staff are really probably going to be overwhelmed, so just make it as easy as you possibly can for them. Oh, it's
Yeah.
good advice, Brother Terry. Now,
Yeah, I tell people the correct answer is yes.
yes.
Don't begin offering excuses. Just the correct answer is a nod and a yes, and then do what they ask you to do. You'll get along with them much better.
Don't be a burden at all. Now,
Hey, that's true.
now, one thing, you all have had a relationship. I think you run grief groups out of the hospital. That's something that you've been doing for some time.
Yes, Salem Health Hospitals and Clinics is the big conglomerate here where we live, and so yes, the hospital has allowed me to come in, and I work with the hospital bereavement committee, and through their education, their community education center, and we have grief support groups there. People call the hospital, register through the hospital, and the hospital actually has a very nice designed support group room. So we're able to use that room, and people from all over the community with all kinds of different losses connect with me and sign up. In groups, I think I heard you say recently, 8 is the perfect number.
Yeah.
For a small group. I allow a couple of more, 10. I've limited it to 10, but we've had some great success over the years having our grief support groups there at the hospital.
Well, and I think you've had people from the support group end up going to your church, and it's been a wonderful ministry, not just to the community, but also it's a way of being light. And I suspect it's also part of the whole relationship you have with the hospital there. You have a history of solving problems and meeting needs. And so when you have a crisis, they're more likely to go to you because that's what they know. And they found you to be trustworthy and helpful in the past. And so they know you'll be helpful in this crisis too.
Yeah, I do get referrals from the hospital for individual grief counseling as well. What happens is, my groups are 6 weeks long. We meet once a week for 6 weeks, and we build a relationship over those 6 weeks. We enter into each other's personal space. And people who come to these groups, they say, now, aren't you the pastor of a church here in town? And I'll say, yes, I am. And I'll give them one of my church cards, and I'll give them a warm welcome, an invitation to come and be with us. And so a good number of our church folks are now attending church here, and it all started. They first met me as a grief counselor. So it's a tremendous ministry. If pastors can facilitate a grief support group there at the church, make it open to the community, meeting people in their time of need with the love of Christ is a very powerful and attraction to Christ, and they will come and see and check out the church, and they may just end up staying.
Well, and it's a fulfillment of coming to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, isn't it? It's being the hands and feet. Good job.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Brother Terry. Thank you for the good work that you're doing there in Oregon, and thank you for how you're ministering, and also for taking the time to share this with us. So we believe it can be a help to many others in this situation that we find ourselves in today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Moody. It's been my pleasure. And my prayers are going to be with you and for all the pastors of our Free Will Baptist churches everywhere, that they can be the feet and hands and minister to those who all these deaths provide us a unique opportunity to be the arm and the heart of Jesus with the compassion that they are going through with these losses.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. May God be with you and bless you.
You too, my friend.